It's The Work by Byron Katie. It's a fascinating book. And if you don't have time to read the book, you can just listen to the Oprah podcast with her. And I'm just reviewing it here quickly. It's 4 questions to change your beliefs. We often tell ourselves stories that make sense of pain, and they're not necessarily true. I'll go through an exercise with you about it. Another part of the podcast that she talks about is defense is the first act of war. The fear of hostility causes us to armor up and protect ourselves. And this is quite often where power struggles start. Because 2 people have 2 differing versions of a story or expectation, and defending what your expectation is actually causes the power struggle. So we'll discuss that. Also in her podcast, Byron Katie talks about the 3 businesses: God's, other people's business, and our own business. So whether or not you're religious, God could just mean destiny, the universe, nature, whatever is out of our control in the world. Other people's business, my son, my husband, my neighbor, like I have 0 control over what happens in their business. And then my own business, what I control in my circle is really just all in my head and in my body and in my thoughts. So staying in our own business. And the last point of the podcast is believing our stressful thoughts cause suffering. So we're going to dive in deeper into how to change our belief systems. So this is on her website, which I will also send out as a resource and a reference. She has a lot of free resources. It's called The Work, and how to do the work takes a lot of practice. 1, you notice who or what upsets or angers you. So this is the triggering moment that I've asked you to kind of mentally make note of. 2nd, we're going to capture all your stressful thoughts. Just write them down on a piece of paper, in a journal, just whatever you're thinking, put it out there on paper and express it. 3rd is to question. Isolate a question and figure out, is this absolutely true? I'm going to work that through with you. And the last step is to turn it around, and I'll also give you an example of that. So I ran a couple workshops, and these are the different stories that came up out of the parents and the mothers that were there. Stories we tell ourselves. Well, my husband is such a selfish asshole. My teen daughter is so rude. My abusive mother didn't love me. So we're going to use a couple of these as examples of, is this belief true? So using only 4 questions from Byron Katie's The Work. Is this belief true? So pick a statement for yourself and write it down. And we'll work through this together, and we can talk about it at the end. So 4 questions. Is it true? Can you absolutely know it's true? How do you react? And what happens when you believe that thought? And who would you be without that thought? So I'm going to pick something very vulnerable and personal for me. I shared in the story that I read to you how my mother was abusive. And so I believed for most of my life that my mother didn't love me. So we're going to work through this together, and I'll share what I actually found out and helped me heal. So if I go with my mother doesn't love me, is this true? And in the moment that I was learning this process, I said, yes, she was abusive, she was raging, her actions did not show love, and I did not feel love. So I believe this to be true. Is this absolutely true? Well, for 48 years of my life, I held on to the belief that this was absolutely true. So how have I lived my life and reacted to the world around me while believing this thought? I know this next slide is really hard to see. I'm going to actually send this to you as well as a reference, but I've highlighted, I can't even read this. I've highlighted some of the emotions that Byron Katie has described here. How do you react, and what happens when you believe this thought that my mother didn't love me? So under anger, I reacted aggressively and disrespectfully towards her. I was very depressed. I was ashamed and powerless. I was confused as a child. I was uncertain and stressed at all times, not knowing when she was going to hit me next and not knowing how she was going to get triggered. I felt helpless, overwhelmed. guess you could see my cursor there. Helpless and overwhelmed. I was afraid all the time. I felt insecure and I was anxious. I felt hurt and rejected by my own mother. I was sad, I was lonely, isolated, and felt unworthy. And I always felt attacked. So these were the feelings that stuck with me since childhood, and I carried through into my adulthood, believing that my mother didn't love me. So I did circle that this is our reaction. And that goes back to our egoic reaction and pattern behavior, which we talked about before. So the fourth question is, how would I have lived my life and who would I be without this thought? So if my mother doesn't love me, wasn't a belief, what are the possibilities in my life? Another hard list of things to see, but I'll read them out loud to you and share it in the references. Who would I be without this thought? I would be more open, perhaps empathetic and understanding. I would be more loving and non-judgmental. Perhaps I'd be happier and thankful. Perhaps I would be more attentive to my mother. Perhaps I'd be more communicative. I could be more helpful and positive. I would bring peace, calm, and feel unburdened. I would be strong and self-affirming. And perhaps I would be more relaxed, grounded, and non-controlling. So these are the possibilities for me if I didn't believe the thought that my mother didn't love me. That was really eye-opening for me to go through this exercise. And this one is even more eye-opening, is to turn around the belief. So this exercise is to take the one statement that you chose, that you've written down, and to flip this statement around multiple times, possibly 4 to 6 times, and reflect and look at if that statement is true in all its different perspectives. So I'm going to turn around the belief that I have carried that my mother didn't love me because she was abusive. So I'll turn that around to, well, if my mother doesn't love me, which I believed was true, well, I don't love my mother. Is that true? I did not act loving to my mother, and I certainly found it very difficult to say I loved my mother. So for a very long time, I carried out the belief and I acted as if I didn't love my mother. Another turnaround is my mother didn't love herself. Is that true? Well, knowing about what self-love is now, looking back, I can see that my mother actually didn't love herself. She's full of shame, full of guilt. She watched soap operas all day long, couldn't get off the couch. She was probably in some form of depression. So is this true? Yes, there is some truth to this statement as well. The next turnaround is, I don't love myself. Right now, I can feel tingles in my body, almost a sense of shame and, wow, I've spent a lot of time, decades of my life, not knowing how to love myself. So is this statement true? Yes, there are parts of me that I understand now that I did not love myself for a very long time. So I can turn around the statement again. Well, what if my mother actually loved me? Is this statement true? And with breath work and therapy and meditation and years of healing work, I realized today, at the age of 52, that my mother did love me. And the last turnaround statement is, in fact, I did love my mother. She's passed away in 2014, but this turnaround process that I started probably 2 or 3 years ago, it was quite an epiphany and really changed how I viewed my mother and my childhood. So understanding now as a mother that when I get triggered and I get angry and maybe full of rage or, disappointment, frustration, I still love my son. Even if I'm yelling and slamming doors, and I still love him, but he doesn't feel my love. And I can't even feel my love in that moment of being triggered. So now that understanding that and being a mother, I have grown more empathetic, more compassion, more understanding of what happened to my mother in her childhood, her story, and now I have greater understanding and compassion of my story and my relationship with my mother. So sorry. So if anyone has a similar story of feeling unloved by a parent, certainly this turnaround on the work with Byron Katie brought through a breakthrough of healing in how I viewed my mother and my childhood.